Hi all, in this course we will cover Tanstack React Router, and by the end of this course I assure you that you will master Tanstack Router. So let's dive into it. Okay, so first of all you have to create a Vite React project. So for that you can use any of these commands, and after the template flag you have to pass React TS for creating a React TypeScript project. After that you need to install Tanstack React Router using this command. So npm install Tanstack React Router. Now in order to use Tanstack Router's file-based routes, you have to install this Vite Tanstack Router plugin, and it basically integrates with Vite. So whenever you would update the route files, it would automatically generate the necessary code for those routes, and you wouldn't have to write the code for routes just like you do in case of other libraries like Router. So let's install it. Okay, so it has been installed. Now you will need to add a line in vite.config.js. Here I'll add this line. So basically I'm importing Tanstack Router Vite function from Tanstack Router Vite plugin, and basically I will just add it here. Now I will create a routes folder inside source directory. This is mandatory. So I will create a routes folder. Then inside this route folder, I will create a file __root.tsx. Now this is basically the root file or the main layout file for our Tanstack router. So I'll say export const route is equal to create root route, and then I'll pass in a component. And for now let's say that it would return a div which would say root component. Now within this component I will also add another component, outlet, from Tanstack React Router. Outlet is basically the location in which the particular component corresponding to the route would render. So whenever we would hit a route, whatever component is specified for that particular route, it would render here in this outlet component portion. Now let's start the server. You will see one thing which is slightly different, and that is you can see that it says generating routes. Now because of the Tanstack Router Vite plugin I have installed and configured in vite.config.js, whenever I would create any file in the routes folder, it would automatically generate routes based on the files I've created. So if I create like folders and inside files, etc., it would automatically assess that this file is inside this folder and this file corresponds to a particular route structure based on the folder structure, and it would automatically generate the code for that. Where is that code? Let's look under it. Okay, so now you can see that there is a file created, route3.gen.ts. If I click on it, you can see that this file is auto generated by Tanstack Router. We are importing the root route from here, __root, then some TypeScript code here. Here you can see that it is exporting the route tree, and it's saying root tree.addChildren. Now the root route by default isn't actually a route, it's basically a layout, and we will add more routes, and these routes will be added here as children to this root route. So that is why you can see that it is empty right now. I haven't added a route just yet. If you have a Vite project, then you can follow the method I've told you. But if you don't have a Vite project and you have a React app from create React app or something, then you will need to use some other method. So in this case you will install the Tanstack Router CLI, and then using the CLI you will run tsr watch. So basically it would do the same thing. Whenever you would change something in the routes directory, it would basically add the code for those routes in the route3.gen.ts file, just like I showed you a minute ago. So if you have a project which isn't based on Vite, then don't worry, you can use this command line tool to do the same thing basically. Now we will basically use this route tree to create a router in the main.tsx file. So let's do that. So I'll come here. Here you can see that it's a normal React app. I'm getting the root and basically creating a route, and here I'm using Chakra provider because I will be using Chakra UI, nothing special. So I'll say import route tree from route3.gen. Then I will create a router. So I'll say const router is equal to create router, and then I'll pass in the route tree here. Now I will add some code related to TypeScript, so that basically makes all the types related to the routes available throughout the project. So I'll say declare module, then stack React Router, then I'll say interface register, and then router should be type of router. And the end I will import the router provider component from Tanstack React Router, and I will pass the router I have just created as a prop. Now if I go to localhost 5173 where my React app is being served, you will see that it says root component and then not found. So root component is what I wrote here in this route component, so that is cool. But in the case of outlet, we can see that it says not found. Why? Because right now I haven't specified any route. So the main route, that is the index route, hasn't got any component. So that is why it's saying not found, because there is no route corresponding to this. So let's add that route. So here I'll say index.lazy.tsx. Now you saw that as soon as I created the file, this particular code was added because the Tanstack Router Vite plugin automatically wrote the code for us, and also it added some code here. So you can see now that it is importing the route from here, and then it is basically adding that index route, and at the end it is adding that index route here in the add children function. Now one thing slightly different is that I didn't write index.tsx and I wrote index.lazy.tsx. If you want that your routes get fetched from the server to the client in one bundle and they don't get fetched from the server only when you go to that particular route that is lazy loaded, then you will create a file using .tsx. But if you want that the particular components for those routes are lazy loaded, that is when you go to that particular route, then and then only the particular code for that should be fetched from the server, then you should use the lazy suffix, and that would basically add lazy loading to your routes. Lazy loading is a great functionality, so I will add lazy loading for all routes in this tutorial. Now if I go to the index route, you can see that it says hello slash, and that is what the dummy component here says. Great. Now one thing more, if the route tree.gen.ts file is not updating anytime you create a file or delete a file or edit a file inside the routes folder, and this file only updates when you restart the server, then you should update the Tanstack Router Vite plugin, Vite.js plugin React, and Vite to the latest versions, and then it would work. Now let's add a second route. So I will say about.lazy.tsx. It automatically creates the code for it. Great. Now if I go here and go to /about, you will see that this particular component shows up. Now you can see that based on the file name, it is automatically creating the route. So I don't have to, write any code for it. So index is obviously the main route, the /home route, whatever you want to call it. So when we go to the main URL / this particular route shows up. And when I go to /about, based on the file name about, then this particular component shows up. So basically we just have to create files inside folders, etc., just like we do in Next.js, and the route code would automatically be created for us. And that is very great functionality which Tanstack React Router has introduced. Again, if I go to the route tree.gen.ts file, now you can see that we are importing the /about route as well. Here this plugin is writing the code for us by itself. We don't have to do that. And here the type based stuff is being written. So now anywhere within the project, if you have to add a path somewhere, then it would provide IntelliSense for paths. So only these paths would be available. And if you add another path other than these, then it would give an error. And that is great. Also now you can see that the about route has also been added in the route tree. Now going to some other route by adding the route here in the search bar is great, but that is not how web search works. We should have links which when clicked on should take us to that particular route. So let's add those. So here in the root route, I will add a link. So I will say link. I will import it from Tanstack React Router. Then inside it, let's say I call it about. And here I will add a toProp. Now inside this toProp, just like I mentioned 1 minute before, due to the automatically generated code in the route tree.gen.ts file, now it is providing us IntelliSense regarding what routes are currently available. So I cannot write something gibberish. I will basically have to adhere to the routes which are currently present inside the routes folder, which is great. So I'll say about, then I'll add another link and I'll call it home. Cool. Now if I click on about, I get to the about route. If I click on home, I get back to the home route. Great. Tanstack Router also has got some amazing dev tools. Let's check them out. So in the root component, I'll say Tanstack Router Dev Tools. So basically these would be imported from the Tanstack Router Dev Tools package, and this would be installed alongside Tanstack React Router. Now you can see that the Tanstack Router logo is present here. If I click on it, it shows the dev tools, and our dev tools have a lot of information. For example, I have here all the routes I have. So the /route and about route. If I go to, let's say, the about route, you can see that the current route changes. Also, if I click on the about route, you can see the information about the current route, the URL params it has, the query params it has, etc. Right now it hasn't got anything, so that's why you can see nothing here. But let's say if I add something like post id is equal to 2, you will see that a search param has been added here, post id 2, and all the information related to particular route would be present here, and also the router overall here. So this is an amazing functionality Tanstack Router gives us. Okay, so I've stylized the root layout a bit and I've added a navigation bar. using Chakra UI. These are just some basic styles. Also, I've given it a class name of link. So I've also added a class to the link, and this link has this purplish color and font size of 14 pixel. If you click on this link, you can see that an active class is added as well. So by default, if there is a link whose path matches the current path of your website, then an active class would be added by default. So I haven't done anything. An active class would be added by default. So if I added an active style class here, so color should be white. So that is how I can say that this particular link is active or not. Now another thing is, by default, if I load the website, because I have lazy loaded routes, the about route won't be loaded here. So you can see that the code for the index route has been fetched from the server, but the code for the about route hasn't been. The code related to the about route would only be fetched when I would click on the about route, as you can see here. But I can also prefetch the component related to that particular route. I can do that using the preload prop. So here in this particular link, I can pass a prop. So preload, then I can pass intent. So for right now, this is the only option available for preload. Now what would happen is, instead of the about route code being fetched when I click on that particular link, it would be fetched when I hover over the link for a certain period of time. So right now you can see that I hover over it and the code related to this particular route gets fetched. I'm still on the home route, I'm not on the about route, but still it gets prefetched, which is great. You can control some other stuff as well. So if I write preload, I can also give a preload delay if I want, but the default is good for me. If I want that this prefetch thing should be present for all routes by default, then I can add it here in the main.tsx file. So here I'll say default preload intent. So now this thing would work for all routes by default. Okay, so now I want to create two routes. One route should be /posts, and then the second route should be /post/to something. So this can be variable like post ID, and I will display posts inside the post route. And when I click on a particular post, I will pass the post ID here in this URL, and then that particular page which would render on this particular route would get the post ID, and I would show only that post. So that is what I want to do. So for that, I will create a folder. So right now you saw that I was adding the files directly inside the routes directory, but now I'll create a folder. So I will say posts. So now if I want that I create a /post route, I will add a index.lazy.tsx file. And now you can see that it added a /post route by default. Similarly, I will add a file for this particular route as well, but I will do it in the next section. Okay, for the /post route, I've already created a component here. So I want that this particular component should show here. So I will say posts, let me import it. Now let me add a link for the post here as well. So I will go to the root route. Let me copy this and I'll write post here and post here. Okay, so now if I click on post, the post component has been loaded, but right now there isn't anything here. So basically, if I go to the post component, you can see that I have a post array, and then I'm mapping over the post array and basically showing the post ID and title. So right now, post array is empty. I want to fetch the post related data from an endpoint. So let's do that. Now there are two ways to do it. One way is the easy way, that is I can add the query here inside the component using fetch and use effect or use query from direct query, whatever. Whenever the component would mount, the query would run and the data would be fetched and displayed on the UI. Now that is great, but the disadvantage for that is that first the page would come from the server, then the component would mount, then the query would run and display the data on the page. So these two things are not happening in parallel. So basically this is a blocking behavior and we don't want that. So Tanstack Router provides us with an API where we can do these two things in parallel, and when both the data from the query as well as the page are ready, then basically it will display them on the UI. So let's see how we can do that. Okay, so in order to do that, I will have to create another file. So I'll say index.tsx. So basically this is the same thing, same route, but now I've created a route using the create file route. Don't worry, it would create only one route, but I want to use the loader API, which is available only on the create file route function and not available on the create lazy file route function. So the component would be present here. I would only add the code related to fetching the data. So here I'll say loader, and loader is a function. It's an async function and it would return some data, and then I would get the data inside the component. So basically this is the URL which I have to hit and send me endpoint. So I'll say const post type would be post array is equal to await fetch, and I'll add the URL here .json, and then I will return posts. Now within this particular component which I have provided in the route, I can get that particular information. So in order to get the information, I will use the get route API function. So I'll say const route is equal to get route API. Now here I will add the route. So you can see all the routes I have. So //about/post. I want to get the data related to /post. So I will do that. Then here I'll say const posts is equal to route dot use loader data. And then I'll remove this dummy variable from here. Now if I go to the post page, you can see the data coming, and also you can see that a network request has been sent here. Okay, so this particular endpoint is very fast, so it doesn't take very long. So I've added a dummy delay of 3 seconds. Now if I let's say refresh, you will see that a blank screen is visible for 3 seconds, and then it shows the page, and that's not really a good UX. So what we should do is we should show a pending component till the data comes. So let's add the pending component. So in order to add the pending component, here in the same file where I've specified the loader, I'll say pending component, and then I'll pass a loader component I've already made. Now if I refresh, you can see that the loader component is shown till the data comes from the loader function. If you want to show a default pending component for all routes and not specific pending components for certain routes, then you can also do that. So I'll remove it, and here in the main create route function, I'll say default pending component, and I will import the loader component here. Now basically this pending component would be shown for all routes. Okay, so now I added 2 buttons, prev and next. So what I want is when I click on the next button, a query param gets added here, page, and when I click on next, it basically gets incremented. So initially when I click on next, it says page is equal to 1, then 2, 3, and so on, and then prev basically decrements it, and based on the page value, I want to fetch different data from the server. Okay, so first of all, I will have to add a validateSearch function here. So I will say validateSearch. Then basically this validateSearch function is giving me search, and its type would be record, where the key would be a string and the type of value would be unknown. Now here I will return an object, and page would be a key, and here I'll say number search page as string or 0. So if no query param for page is provided, then I would basically want to parse it as 0, and then here I will specify a type page number. So basically the search params would come. Now obviously by default the router doesn't know what search param should come, so here I'm saying that whatever search params come, I'm basically only parsing the page query param and not other query params in this particular route. Now let's add the logic for mutating query params from these buttons. So I will use the use navigate hook. So I'll say const navigate is equal to use navigate, and then I will get this. I'll say navigate, and navigate basically expects a key 2. So where do you want to navigate to? I want to navigate to the same route, and then search. So basically I want to navigate to the same route, but I want to in this case decrement the query param if I have any. So I'll say page -1. So let me get the page query param as well. So from the route function, I'll say const page is equal to route dot use search. So here I'll say page or 0. If the page is already 0, I don't want to decrement it to -1, so I'll say is disabled minus page. So if page is 0, then I want this button to be disabled. So I will copy this and paste it here, same thing, but now here I want to increment it. Now if I go here, I click on next, you can see that the query param for page is incrementing. Great. Now I want to get this query param inside the loader function so that I can send it to the backend and get records based on that page. So here before the loader function, I will have another function. So I'll say beforeLoad. Here I'll get the search params, and I will return page search page or 0. Now here in the loader function, I will get the context, and then inside the context I will get the page, which I am basically returning here. So whatever would be returned here would be present here as a context. Now this particular dummy API doesn't have a page param, so I cannot send a page param to the backend and get paginated results. So basically I will manually do it here, but you get the idea. So I want the page size to be 10. Now here instead of just returning post, I'll say return post slice. page size into page size into page plus page size. Now you can see that based on the page, I'm only seeing 10 records. So for page 2, I'm only seeing records from 21 to 30. If I go to page 1, the records start from 11 and so on. So pagination has been enabled here. So now we know how to work with query params as well. Okay, so I've added the /post route. Now I want to add the /post id route. So here for adding a dynamic route, we'll have to append the file name with the $sign. So I'll say $postid.lazy.tsx. So now you can see this route. I will replace it with the post component I have already made. So post. Now right now I've got two objects, post and user, but these are dummy objects. But what I want is, based on the post ID, I fetch a post, and then based on the post I fetch the user, and then basically I display the post related information. So post ID, title, body, and the username and email corresponding to the post. Now let's add the post id.tsx file, and then corresponding to that, let's add the loader for fetching this information. So I'll say post id.tsx. Great. Now here I would add a loader. So async. Okay, so I've got basically these two routes. So first I'll say const post is equal to, let me assign it a type of post. Then it would be await fetch. Let me add the URL here. Now basically I want to pass the ID which I would get from the URL, so I can get that using the params variable I get from the loader. So I'll say params.postid. Now you can see that TypeScript is an action because this route has a post ID variable here. The loader knows that the params which it would receive would have a post ID, so it basically has type safety. So .json. Now let me fetch the user as well. So I'll say user, type would be user, and then instead of params.postid, I'll say post user ID, and then basically I will return post and user. Great. Now here within this post component, I will remove these. I will say const route is equal to get route API, and then I'll pass in the path to this particular component. Here I'll say const post user is equal to route dot use loader data. There is one mistake I made. Let me do users here. Now if I go to the /post1 route, you can see that the post and the user has been displayed here. Great. Now what I want is, I want to add a functionality where if I click on go back to post, I go back to the post route. So let's add that. So let me go to the post component. I will use the navigate function again, use navigate, and then I will say on click navigate to, I want to go to the post route. So now if I click on this, I go back to the post route. Now I also want to add this functionality where if I click on a particular post, I go to that particular post. That hasn't been added yet. So I will go to the post component and I will copy this, and in the on click I will add this. So here I'll say post ID, and I don't want to pass any such params, but I want to pass a param. So by default, if the route has a param here, the navigate function would expect that I pass a param. So I'll say params, and I'll say post ID would be the post ID. So now if I click on any post, you can see that I go here. Now if I click on 2, I get a loader and I get shown the post 2. Great. Okay, so if I go to a route which doesn't exist at the moment, let's say I type some gibberish, then you can see that not found gets shown here. Now this not found is the same as we saw initially when there was no route present. So for a route which is not present, by default Tanstack router shows not found. But if you want to show a custom component, you can also do that. If you want to add a default not found component for the entire app, then you can do that here. So I'll say default not found component, and I will pass a not found component which I have created. So now if I go here, you can see this not found component. Now there is another scenario where the resource doesn't get fetched for the particular ID. So if I click on this, the post for the ID 1 gets shown here because it makes sense because there are posts here. So obviously I will be able to fetch the post corresponding to this ID. But what if I pass something else, some gibberish number? Now you can see that nothing gets shown because there is no ID, no user is also fetched. So we want to show a not found error in this case as well. So let's do that. So in the post id.tsx file, inside this loader, for the cases where there is no post, I'm getting an empty object. So I will check if I'm getting an empty object or not. So I'll say object.keys post.length. So if there is no key in this post, then I want to throw not found. So basically not found is a function we are getting from Tanstack router. So now for this case, you can see that it doesn't go further from this request because nothing gets fetched. I throw not found error and this component gets shown. Also, if you want to show a not found component for a particular scenario, you can also do that. So I can say not found component, then I can pass any component here. Now by default, if some error gets thrown inside your page, then basically it would show the error here like this. So I can hide the error, show the error, but this is basically the Tanstack router default. If you want to customize that as well, you can do that. So I can pass a custom error component for this particular route. So I can say error component, and then here I can pass the error component which I have made. So now you see a custom error component here. Similarly, if you want to pass a default error component for the entire app, you can also do that here. So this was the crash course for Tanstack Router, and I tried to cover literally everything related to Tanstack Router, from file-based route to creating different pages, nested routes, fetching data using loaders, accessing search params and URL params, and a lot of other stuff. So if you like the tutorial, smash the like button and subscribe to the channel because it motivates me to make more videos. If you have any question, you can comment down below. If you want me to make some other tutorial regarding Tanstack Router, you can also comment down below and make sure to make that. As always, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.